Welcome to the Humanized Books channel. Today's summary mini-book is based on a philosophical memoir, Sun and Steel, by the acclaimed Japanese author Yukio Mishima. Words can lie, ideas can hide, thinking can become a way to avoid living. Yukio Mishima believed that language weakens reality, that comfort dulls truth, and that a life lived only in thought is already half dead. So he did something extreme. He trained his body to destroy his illusions. He chose discipline over safety, action over explanation, steel over metaphor. Sun and Steel is not a motivational book. It is a challenge, a confrontation with softness, avoidance, and the modern fear of pain. This is a philosophical memoir about what remains when words stop protecting you. Let's begin. Introduction. Words, flesh, and a lifelong contradiction. Sun and Steel is Yukio Mishima's most personal and dangerous book. Written in 1968, it is neither a novel nor a conventional essay, but what Mishima himself called a form of confidential criticism, a confession filtered through philosophy, aesthetics, and discipline. At its center lies a lifelong struggle. Mishima grew up as a writer whose world was formed by language before it was formed by the body. Words came first, flesh came late. This imbalance shaped his art, his obsessions, and eventually his actions. Sun and Steel records his attempt to correct that imbalance through physical training, martial discipline, and exposure to pain, action, and death. This is not a book about fitness. It is about the cost of living only in language and the danger and necessity of returning to the body. Chapter 1. The Tyranny of Words and the Absence of the Body. Mishima begins with a confession that overturns ordinary assumptions. For most people, the body comes first. Language follows. For him, it was the opposite. Words preceded flesh. As a child, he lived almost entirely in language. Memory, imagination, and literary sensitivity developed early, while the body remained distant, abstract, and unreal. The physical world arrived late, already filtered through concepts. By the time flesh appeared, it had already been weakened by words. Mishima describes language as corrosive. Words do not simply describe reality, they dissolve it into abstraction. Like acid etching metal, they eat away at the solidity of things. This is their power, but also their danger. A life lived primarily through words risks losing contact with existence itself. He uses a striking image, a wooden pillar eaten by white ants. In ordinary development, the pillar comes first and the ants arrive later. In his case, the ants were already there. The pillar emerged half destroyed. Words had already done their work. This early imbalance produced two opposing impulses within him. One was loyalty to words, to writing, to the intellectual life. The other was a growing hunger for a realm where words had no authority at all, a realm of pure action, flesh, and reality. At first, he resolved this contradiction by separating the two worlds. Words belonged to art. The body belonged to fetish. Reality was admitted only where language could not interfere. This created a rigid dualism, spirit on one side, flesh on the other. The body, for him, became something almost frightening. He did not experience it as my body, because to do so would have forced words into contact with reality. And once that contact occurred, words would lose their purity. Reality would become unavoidable. This misunderstanding led to panic. He expected the body to announce itself clearly, nobly, as existence. Instead, it appeared as something contradictory and disturbing, a form of existence that rejected existence. He mistook this universal human condition for a personal defect. From this fear arose an ideal. If his actual body was flawed, then an ideal body must exist, a body free from words, silent, taciturn, perfect in form, untouched by abstraction. This ideal body became the model for his aesthetic thinking. Beauty, he decided, must be free from corrosion. Art should imitate physical beauty that had never been touched by language. This was a contradiction, but a productive one. It allowed him to write while keeping reality at a distance. Thus, he became a novelist. Writing intensified his thirst for the body even as it kept him apart from it. Words multiplied, and so did the hunger for what words could not reach. The turning point came much later when he realized that the body could be learned like a foreign language, not symbolically, literally, through Sun and Steel. He recalls a childhood memory of shrine festivals, watching men carry heavy structures through the streets. Their faces were intoxicated, their eyes turned upward. He could not understand what they were seeing. Only years later, after submitting his own body to physical strain, did he realize the truth. They were looking at the sky, not symbolically, not imaginatively. The same sky, seen identically by all. Physical exertion had stripped away individuality. What remained was a shared vision, born of equal strain and equal courage. This revelation shattered his faith in purely personal intuition. It showed him that physical experience could produce universality without words. Tragedy, he realized, is not born from special sensitivity, but from average sensibility raised to nobility through courage and action. Words can describe tragedy, but they cannot participate in it. Participation requires the body. From this moment, the direction of his life shifted. He began to suspect that reality could only be trusted where it stared back. Ideas do not return the gaze. Opponents do. Pain does. Death does. To approach truth, he would have to abandon safety. He would have to train his body, accept suffering, and step into a world where there was no time to explain, only time to act. Thus began his submission to Sun and Steel. Chapter 2. Sun, Steel, and the Discovery of Action. Mishima does not describe his turn to physical training as self-improvement. He describes it as necessity. Words had reached their limit. They could analyze, beautify, and even wound, but they could not confirm reality. The body, he realized, could do what language never could. It could answer back. He begins this chapter with the sun. The sun represents exposure, inevitability, and indifference. It shines equally on all bodies. It does not care about personality, talent, or intention. To step into the sun is to submit oneself to something that cannot be argued with. For Mishima, this mattered deeply. Words are negotiable. They can be revised, softened, disguised. The sun offers no such mercy. It burns or it does not. It reveals the body exactly as it is. In this sense, the sun becomes a judge, but also a purifier. Steel, by contrast, represents resistance. Where the sun tests endurance, steel tests will. Weights, bars, blades, and later weapons demand decision. They require commitment in the moment. There is no postponement. Either the body lifts, strikes, holds, or it fails. Through weight training and martial discipline, Mishima begins to experience a new relationship with himself. The body is no longer an idea. It becomes an object of effort, pain, and gradual transformation. Muscles respond to repetition. Weakness reveals itself honestly. There is no room for metaphor. This process teaches him something unsettling. Physical training does not reward imagination. It rewards obedience. The body improves only when it submits to structure. Freedom, he learns, does not come from expression but from form. This insight clashes with his literary instincts. Writing thrives on ambiguity, nuance, and delay. Training thrives on clarity, repetition, and immediacy. In the gym and the dojo, there is no irony. Movements are either correct or incorrect. Strength either appears or it does not. Mishima becomes fascinated by this absence of interpretation. For the first time in his life, he inhabits a world where meaning is not debated. Pain is not symbolic. Fatigue is not psychological. Failure is visible and undeniable. As his body changes, so does his perception of beauty. He no longer sees beauty as something fragile or purely aesthetic. Beauty becomes inseparable from effort. A trained body is beautiful, not because of its appearance, but because of the discipline it embodies. This leads him to a provocative conclusion. Beauty without danger is incomplete. Art that avoids risk is ornamental, not essential. The body, when trained and exposed, carries within it the possibility of destruction. That possibility gives it seriousness. He contrasts this with modern culture's obsession with comfort and safety. A society that protects the body from pain also protects it from meaning. When survival becomes the highest value, life loses its sharpness. Mishima sees this as a spiritual impoverishment. Through training, he begins to understand action as a form of truth. Action does not explain itself. It reveals character instantly. In moments of exertion or confrontation, there is no time for self-deception. One discovers what one is willing to endure and what one is not. This discovery alters his understanding of courage. Courage is not bravado or impulse. It is the willingness to act without guarantees. The body, unlike words, cannot hide behind intention. It either stands or collapses. He becomes increasingly critical of intellectualism detached from action. Thought that never risks embodiment becomes sterile. Ideas that are never tested by the body drift toward nihilism. For Mishima, this is not an abstract critique. It is autobiographical. The more he trains, the more he senses that writing alone has protected him from reality. Literature allowed him to approach death, violence, and sacrifice imaginatively without ever committing to them. Training removes this protection. Steel teaches him limits. Sun teaches him exposure. Together, they dismantle the illusion that life can be lived safely through representation. Reality, he concludes, demands participation. Yet this realization is not comforting. It creates tension. The more he commits to the body, the more he feels the insufficiency of words. And yet, words remain his vocation. He cannot abandon them. He can only challenge them. This chapter marks the point where Mishima stops seeking reconciliation between word and body. Instead, he accepts their conflict as permanent. The task is no longer to unify them peacefully, but to allow them to confront each other honestly. From this confrontation will emerge his understanding of the warrior ethos, not as nostalgia, but as a discipline of presence, a way of living where action and meaning meet without mediation. The body, once feared, becomes his teacher, and steel, once external, becomes internalized as structure, resolve, and form. Chapter 3. The Warrior Ethos and the Dignity of Structure. By the time Mishima turns explicitly to the idea of the warrior, he is careful to strip it of romance. He is not interested in nostalgia, costume, or historical reenactment. The warrior ethos he seeks is not about violence, but about structure, about living in a way that binds thought to action and intention to consequence. For Mishima, the warrior represents a human being who has accepted limits. Unlike the artist, who can endlessly revise, reinterpret, and postpone, the warrior must act within fixed conditions. Time is finite. The body is vulnerable. Decisions cannot be undone. These constraints do not diminish life. They give it shape. He contrasts this with the modern intellectual life, which he sees as dangerously formless. Words allow infinite postponement. One can always explain later, reinterpret afterward, or escape into irony. The self remains untested. Responsibility remains abstract. The warrior, by contrast, lives under the pressure of immediacy. Every action carries weight. Every mistake has consequences. This pressure produces clarity. It eliminates self-indulgence. There is no room for sentimentality when the body is at stake. Mishima's fascination with the samurai tradition grows from this insight. He is drawn not to its historical details, but to its psychological discipline. The warrior code demands loyalty, restraint, and readiness for death, not as morbid fixation, but as recognition of reality. To live while accepting death as ever-present sharpens perception. It strips away trivial concerns. It forces attention onto what truly matters. Mishima argues that a society that denies death inevitably cheapens life. Comfort becomes the highest good. Risk becomes a pathology. He sees modern Japan and modern civilization more broadly drifting toward this condition. Economic success and technological sophistication have brought security, but at the cost of seriousness. Bodies are preserved, but spirits are anesthetized. Against this backdrop, the warrior ethos becomes an act of resistance. Not resistance against society through rebellion, but resistance against softness through discipline. Training the body, obeying form, and embracing hardship are ways of reintroducing gravity into life. Structure plays a central role here. Mishima repeatedly emphasizes that freedom without structure collapses into chaos. True freedom emerges only within form. Martial arts, military drills, and physical training all impose limits. Movements are prescribed, errors are corrected. The self is shaped by obedience. This obedience is not submission to authority for its own sake. It is submission to reality. Steel does not yield to preference. The body does not respond to excuses. Through repeated exposure to these truths, the warrior learns humility. Mishima contrasts this with the artist's temptation toward narcissism. Art can become a mirror endlessly reflecting the self. The warrior's path forces the self outward, toward something greater and less forgiving. He acknowledges the danger here. The warrior ethos can harden into brutality or fanaticism. Discipline without reflection becomes tyranny. Mishima does not deny this risk. He accepts it. For him, danger is inseparable from meaning. He argues that ethical life requires exposure. One must risk being wrong, wounded, or defeated. A morality that avoids risk becomes mere opinion. The warrior's code, for all its severity, binds ethics to action. This perspective reshapes his understanding of honor. Honor is not reputation or pride. It is consistency between belief and behavior. To speak of values without embodying them is, in his view, a form of dishonesty. The warrior ethos demands integration. Thought must pass through the body. Ideals must survive contact with pain. Only then do they deserve allegiance. Mishima does not claim that everyone must become a warrior. He claims that everyone must confront the question the warrior cannot avoid. What are you willing to risk for what you believe? By the end of this chapter, it becomes clear that his attraction to the warrior ethos is not escapism. It is an attempt to rescue meaning from abstraction, to anchor life in something solid, demanding, and real. Structure, he concludes, is not the enemy of freedom. It is its condition. Chapter 4. Death, Beauty, and the Confrontation with Reality. In this chapter, Mishima moves closer to the most dangerous edge of his thinking. If earlier chapters established the opposition between word and body, and then discipline and action, here he turns to the final consequence of taking the body seriously: death. He does not approach death sentimentally, nor does he treat it as tragedy alone. For Mishima, death is the ultimate confirmation of reality. It is the one event that cannot be revised, explained away, or softened by language. Words stop at its edge. As a writer, he had long circled death imaginatively. Literature allowed him to describe it, aestheticize it, and even admire it from a distance. But this, he realizes, was another form of evasion. To write about death without accepting its physical certainty is to remain protected by abstraction. The body removes this protection. The trained body, especially, lives in constant dialogue with its own limits. Injury, exhaustion, and pain are reminders that existence is finite. Training sharpens awareness of this finitude rather than numbing it. Mishima makes a crucial distinction here. Awareness of death is not the same as a desire for it. He does not seek annihilation for its own sake. What he seeks is intensity. A life lived under the shadow of death acquires seriousness. Each moment gains weight. This is where beauty enters the argument. For Mishima, beauty is inseparable from transience. Something that cannot perish, cannot be beautiful in the deepest sense. Endurance alone is not enough. Beauty requires risk. He contrasts the muscular body trained through discipline with the soft body preserved through comfort. The latter may survive longer, but it avoids confrontation. The former accepts vulnerability. Its beauty lies not only in form, but in readiness for destruction. This idea extends beyond the body to art. Art that avoids danger, that seeks only approval or longevity, becomes decorative. True art, like true action, risks failure and rejection. It exposes the self to judgment. Mishima recognizes how unsettling this perspective is. Modern society seeks safety above all else. Pain is treated as pathology. Death is hidden away. The result, he argues, is a culture that has lost contact with the intensity of existence. By turning toward death rather than away from it, Mishima believes one regains perspective. Fear becomes more precise. Desire becomes clearer. Trivial concerns lose their grip. What remains is the question of how to live honestly within limited time. He reflects on the idea of a beautiful death, a concept often misunderstood as glorification. For Mishima, it does not mean a theatrical end. It means a death consistent with one's life. A death that confirms, rather than contradicts, one's values. This insistence on consistency returns us to the central tension of the book. Words promise coherence, but often excuse contradiction. Action demands coherence, because it exposes contradiction instantly. One cannot speak courage and live comfort without being revealed. Death, in this framework, becomes the final test of integrity. It reveals whether a life has been lived in alignment or avoidance. Mishima does not claim certainty about passing this test. He claims only that it must be acknowledged. The chapter closes with a sense of narrowing focus. As distractions fall away, only a few questions remain. How should a person live, knowing the body will fail? What kind of discipline makes that failure meaningful? And how can action give weight to words that would otherwise dissolve into air? Death is no longer an abstract endpoint. It becomes a presence shaping every choice. And in that presence, Mishima finds not despair but clarity. Chapter 5. Icarus, Unity, and the Final Confrontation. In the final chapter, Mishima turns toward synthesis, not reconciliation, but collision. Word and body do not merge peacefully. They meet violently, like opposing forces that can only resolve themselves through impact. He introduces the image that gives the chapter its emotional gravity: Icarus. Not the moralized Icarus of cautionary tales, but a figure of tragic clarity. Icarus does not misunderstand the danger. He accepts it. His flight is not ignorance, but defiance of moderation. He chooses intensity over duration. For Mishima, Icarus embodies the fate of anyone who attempts to live fully in both word and action. To soar using wings made of wax is to accept impermanence. To rise is already to risk falling. But refusing to rise is, in his view, a quieter kind of death. This is where the duality of sun and steel reaches its conclusion. The sun represents exposure to absolute truth. Steel represents discipline and form. Together, they create a path that cannot be extended indefinitely. The body trained to endure will still fail. Structure does not prevent destruction. It gives it meaning. Mishima reflects on how writing has changed since his immersion in physical discipline. Words no longer feel sovereign. They feel provisional. Writing becomes a report from the edge rather than a substitute for experience. Language is stripped of illusion and returned to its proper place, testimony, not refuge. He acknowledges that most of human life cannot be lived at this intensity. Society depends on compromise, repetition, and survival. But he insists that without individuals willing to press against limits, culture stagnates. Art loses seriousness. Ethics lose weight. The warrior ethos, he now clarifies, is not a social program. It is a personal vow, a commitment to live without lying to oneself, to refuse comfort when it contradicts belief, to align form, action, and meaning even when the cost is high. This leads him to the most unsettling realization of the book. True unity between word and body cannot be sustained indefinitely. It can only be achieved in moments. Moments of action where thought is tested by consequence. Moments where life stands fully exposed. He does not present this as a model for everyone. He presents it as his own necessity. The contradictions of his life demand resolution. And resolution, he believes, cannot come through explanation. The final pages move toward silence. Words thin out. The argument becomes almost ceremonial. What remains is an image of ascent, heat, strain, and clarity. The poem of Icarus, which closes the book, is not an ornament. It is a seal. A final acknowledgement that beauty, truth, and destruction are bound together. To touch the sun is to accept melting wings. To live fully is to accept an ending. Mishima leaves us not with advice, but with a challenge. To ask ourselves where we hide behind words, where we avoid the body, where we choose safety over coherence, and whether we are willing, even briefly, to step into a life that stares back. Sun and steel do not promise happiness. They promise reality, and reality, Mishima suggests, is worth the risk. A reflective conclusion on the book. Sun and Steel is not a book that offers comfort. It offers confrontation. Yukio Mishima asks what happens when a life is lived almost entirely in words, and what must be risked to return to reality through the body. Across these pages, discipline replaces fantasy, action challenges thought, and structure becomes the condition for meaning. Mishima shows that words, left unchecked, can dissolve truth into abstraction. The body, when trained and exposed, resists this erosion. It answers back. It demands sincerity. The book does not argue that everyone must live as a warrior. It argues that every life must face the question the warrior cannot avoid, whether belief and behavior align. Beauty, Mishima suggests, is not found in safety or endurance, but in coherence. In a life where thought is tested by action and where meaning is earned through risk. Sun and Steel leaves us with no reassurance, only clarity. Reality cannot be negotiated. It must be met. Thank you for listening. If this audiobook challenged how you think, support the work by subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts below. Comments shape future content. Stay curious, stay aware, and return for deeper explorations. All the best, and take care of yourselves.